Welcome to our webcast, Everyday A3 Conversations, Practicing for Mastery. I'm Larry Goldman, Vice President of Marketing at MoreSteam.com, and your moderator for today's hour-long webcast. After today, you'll be able to access the recording and slide set of this webcast on the MoreSteam website. Here's today's agenda. After this brief introduction, we'll dedicate most of the hour to the presentation. We'll set aside some time during and at the end of the hour for Q&A. You'll have noticed that we've placed all attendees in listen-only mode, but we do want this session to be as interactive as possible. GoToWebinar provides you with an easy way to send us your questions as they occur to you throughout the hour. Just use the dialog box shown here to the right. If the dialog is collapsed into a small toolbar, just click on the top expansion arrow and type in your request and press send. Make sure to enter your request in the question section, not the one marked chat. So this question section down here. Please note that GoToWebinar always provides two alternatives for the audio, telephone and voice over IP through your computer speakers. If you encounter quality issues with the voice over IP, please dial in with the telephone option instead. Your host, MoreSteam.com, is the leading provider of online Lean Six Sigma and process improvement training and technology. Since the year 2000, we've trained nearly 400,000 professionals in all levels of online belt training and certification, including our online 18-hour Lean Methods course and Master Black Belt training, which covers advanced Lean topics and is offered in partnership with The Ohio State University. More about that later. MoreSteam delivers training for individuals and the enterprise. For large training initiatives, we partner with organizations to supply software as service tools and online courses, including over 250 hours of modular lessons, training in 5 foreign languages, interactive classroom project simulations, and online testing and project management tools. We're proud sponsors of some of the largest existing blended learning process excellence programs in the world. And we also partner with major learning institutions, including the Extended Education Program at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And now on to today's presentation. In recent years, the A3 report and A3 thinking have gained in popularity because their clear, concise logic does an excellent job of connecting upper-level objectives with communication and action. Yet organizations are still grappling with how to fully incorporate A3s into their toolboxes and cultures. As with any new tool, implementation can be tricky, and a lack of practice can hinder mastery. Our speaker for today, Dr. Eric Olsen, regularly addresses these challenges as he works with his students and with local businesses connected to the Central Coast Lean community. Dr. Olsen is Associate Professor of Industrial Technology, Orfalea College of Business at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, California. That's a mouthful. He teaches undergraduate and master courses in Lean Thinking, Six Sigma, and Operations Management. Prior to joining academia, he had over 20 years of industry experience in engineering and manufacturing management, working for Caterpillar Tractor, Litton Poly Scientific, and Hewlett-Packard. So in this webinar, Dr. Olsen is going to help us discover ways to make use of the A3s, make them more practical and generally applicable. He'll provide many examples of how he incorporates the logic of A3 thinking into his everyday activities. And he'll discuss how you can reinforce the practice and make it more likely to stick as part of your organization's Lean Six Sigma culture. Eric, we're so pleased to finally have you on our webcast series. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Larry. I'm really glad to be here. Great to have this opportunity to talk about something I love, which are A3s. I don't see that. Have we switched over, Larry? Because I'm not seeing my slide on the screen here.
All right.
There we go. All right, show my screen. All right. And let's see, Larry. I'm just sort of yeah. Okay. So it looks like we're fine. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So. Thank you all for attending this webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I hope this is not going to be your typical webinar PowerPoint presentation, and I think, if you look at this first slide here, I think you'll get a sense of that. But what I hope to do is to actually use an A3 to learn more about A3s. So we're going to be going through this A3 slide that you see here on your screen and talk about it. Now I'm going to assume also that most of you had some sort of exposure to A3 or at least are interested in learning about A3s. Otherwise you probably wouldn't be on this webinar. But I hope also by the time we get to this, everybody will have at least a basic understanding of what an A3 is and how it works. Larry, and to help us get a little bit better sense of what's going on in the audience, could you go ahead and launch that poll so we can kind of see what
You got it.
who we have in the audience here and whatnot right now. And I'll come back to the results of that in a little bit. So first, as far as an A3 goes, let's see here. I don't seem to be getting my screen controls. Let me see.
Right. Well,
there we go.
while the polls
Yeah, there we go.
we'll just
good.
wait. Yeah,
Okay.
we're at about
All right,
60% voted.
Oh, okay, good. Well, let's see. So just for a little background, this is where we're sort of tying, the idea or the issues that we're going to be discussing to, some sort of higher level or purpose. And essentially an A3 is a problem-solving and organizing and communication tool. It was developed by Toyota as a way for teams and individuals to systematically walk through a plan, do, check, act, or PDCA improvement cycle and capture that thinking and that process on one 11 by 17 sheet of paper. It's meant to tell a compelling story. Now, if I were to ask, take one step back maybe, and ask, well, why did Toyota develop this? I would say that is because they recognize the need to develop, people who practice and teach critical thinking in their organizations. And I've got a few references here that sort of back that idea up. The first
Eric?
one is from yes.
Eric, would you like to see
Yes,
the
I'm here.
results of the polls? We've got about
well, I'm going to
50% in.
ask you, Larry, for the results of the poll when we get down to that little current conditions section.
You
So
got
let me just go ahead and finish through this part, and then I'll prompt you for those poll results. All right?
Mm-hmm.
So the first little reference there is to an article by Spear and Bowen, and this is where they talked about the scientific method really being sort of this embedded DNA of the Toyota production process. And then I've got a little thing from Leiker here on his book, The Toyota Way, where what we're really trying to do is develop leaders, and leaders who can work, live, and teach this philosophy and approach. And one of the places where I really take my cue is from work by John Shook in his excellent book on managing to learn about A3 thinking. And in there he talks about A3s, following this common logic, but also warns that the format and wording are flexible, and we should really be tweaking these things to fit their requirements. So, at this point, I think it's also a little bit of a disclaimer. I want to apologize in advance to any of the A3 dogmatists out there in the audience. I love you guys, and I love A3 thinking. But if you think that if you're one of those people that think there's an absolute right or wrong way to do A3s, I'm probably not in that camp. And this webinar is actually designed to maybe prompt your thinking and expand your thinking a little bit outside maybe what we've typically thought of that, A3 box or actually set of A3 boxes. Now, coming down to the current conditions, Larry, this is where I would like to, use some of our poll results, because we actually have new inputs into our current conditions, which were the results of this poll. So let's see. So I'm looking at the poll results on my other screen. So we've just learned about A3s and intend to use. Looks like 57% are interested shoppers, I guess. 25% have a formal program in place, but use is sporadic. And let's see, we got something in the tune of 11% forced and situational, but only small numbers where we've got a healthy program in place and a very low number that use A3 as part of their regular culture. And it's to that end level, which is sort of that end goal that we're heading to. So I appreciate that. Do we have another poll result, Larry, or was that the only one on that first go round?
That was for the first poll. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, good. Well, this, so that tells me a little bit about where you guys are coming from. In addition, in our current state or our current conditions, I would point that I think companies swim in a virtual sea of problems. And, the interesting thing about fish is that they tend to see water last. Sometimes we don't notice all the opportunities we have for A3 thinking or the things that we need to do. Another part of our current situation, and I'm particularly attuned to this in academia, is I think we're all sort of in the search for, what's the secret sauce, if you will, of Lean Six Sigma. I think we're all still in the learning process trying to understand, well, what makes this Toyota production system work? What are the key ingredients? And we're trying to discover that. And I would argue that, A3 thinking is definitely part of that secret sauce. The other thing is, I think, my research shows, and I think others support this, is that one of the real things that moves the performance needle for organizations with regards to all the different tools and whatnot that we have in the whole Lean Six Sigma body of knowledge is really just getting the employees engaged in problem solving. This is really what moves the needle. A lot of times it doesn't necessarily matter what particular tool it is or what approach you're using, but as long as those people are engaged, you're going to get good results. And certainly A3's problem solving shares a common ancestry with the DMAIC approach used by Six Sigma folks, the demand, measure, analyze, improve, control. And that common ancestry is the plan, do, check, act, or improvement wheel advocated by Deming and other early quality gurus. So I guess another observation I would make that, although many people are trained in A3, and I think our poll sort of bears out that, at least you've gotten some level of exposure, rarely do you see that A3 gaining traction outside of the classroom or beyond that sort of first tough experience where underneath the guidance of your mentor, your sensei, you're cranking out your first A3. Where is that second, third, fourth, and fifth A3? And this is true even when supported by management. There's management asking for A3s, or what does management need to do to get this to happen on a more ready, easy basis? And then I've also noted a lot that one of the real opportunity areas is in addressing some of the same old conversations and arguments that we have in meetings, all across our organizations, without clear conclusions and definitely without clear action plans, flowing out of them. And finally, A3's, often considered a formal, complex tool, sort of the heavy hitter tool that's only brought out for special occasions. And with those sorts of current conditions, if I had to succinctly sort of say, well, what is really the problem here, is because of all these things, we do not get enough practice in A3 thinking really for mastery or for being able to apply it the way we should. Now, at this point, I know I've kind of gone in a little bit deep and fast. We've hit, two of the first boxes on the A3. And I think it would be really useful maybe to do a little quick a little mini tutorial on, exactly what is A3 or what is an A3. So here I've got a sort of an overview slide of what an A3 is. You'll notice it's a 7-step, problem-solving process laid out here. It has this feature where it ties to management, management goals and objectives. It has a logic that's stated explicitly. It provides a solution. There's a plan. There's opportunity for implementation and follow-up. And it's just a real sort of solid, good, logical approach. The other thing I would point out to you as you look at your A3, there's actually sort of a left side and a right side. So if I was looking at an 11 by 17 sheet of paper, which is really just, two 8.5 by 11s, side by side, I could look at page 1, that left-hand side is really about the logic, the justification, the analysis side. So that's the left side. And then the right side talks about, what would we need to do with regards to implementation? What are the solutions? What's the implementation? What does the execution look like? So that's what the right side is. So looking here in the background, why are we talking about it? This is where we want to try to tie the A3 to some sort of higher goal or objective. This would be, what's the tie to the management strategy up here? What's the part of the bigger picture here? In the current conditions section, we're really trying to get an idea of the current state. Where do we stand today? What's going on both plus and minus with regards to this issue that we're trying to address. And then finally, at the bottom of the current conditions, we've got some sort of problem statement, leveraging off of that adage that, a problem well stated is half solved. And so we're trying to capture that and make that clear for everyone in communication. Next, in the goals and targets section, we're looking for, what's the specific outcome requirement, but really this defines what we want for our future state. Where are we going? What are we trying to do? And this goals and targets are generally derived from both, what the management overall goals are, and then also, what was the problem that we're trying to address. The analysis section looks really to try to identify what's the root cause. So we're going to use the simplest type of problem-solving tool that we can in order to analyze the problem, show that cause and effect relationship, and try to identify some things that are fixable sustainably and for the long term. Now, moving over to the right side of the A3, here's where we have a proposed countermeasures. And, this is sort of where, A3, has a little bit of its own set of jargon. You may or may not be familiar with the term countermeasures. And, you can argue, well, what's the difference between a countermeasure and a solution? I'm not, really here to debate that point. It might be a different webinar. But really, one way you can think about it as a countermeasure, we always assume in lean and continuous improvement that there's always potentially something better down the road, so we never have a final solution per se. The other way to think about the countermeasure is, treat it as some freedom. You have the opportunity not to necessarily get it right the first time, and things are then fixable, down the road. So this is where we figure out, what proposals, what action items, what things are we going to do to reach our goals or our target condition. And finally, at the bottom of the right side, here we have the planning piece. And this is really, the plan is a real key differentiator that I think sets A3 thinking off from other problem-solving methodology, is we're attaching not only the goals, the logic, the analysis, and the solution, but now we're looking at, okay, what's the plan to achieve that? What's the implementation? And here you can see, Gantt charts and what, who, by, when elements of what the plans are, and this information is there to follow up. Also, some level of measurement or what the accountability, how are we going to know when we've achieved our goals and reached some sort of final state. Finally, the last part, in the follow-up, this is a great feature. I like to use this to capture, things that might be out of scope. An A3 is a very focused document trying to get to a specific result, but in the course of going through that process, we learn things, and there are other things that we may or may not want to address, and we can capture those things here. We can capture learning. We can also capture or try to use this to make sure we reinforce that whole plan, do, check, act, control feature to make sure the solutions that we've put in place stay and are stickable. So that's sort of a little overview. This was actually taken from John Shook's book, Managing to Learn. You may have other, 5 or 7 step processes. One of the things I'll talk about is that, I think A3s are relatively agnostic with regards to exactly the type of logic or steps that you would use. The important thing is just pick something that you're familiar with. Now I'm going to sort of move back to our A3 and look at some goals and targets here. What's the future state that we want to get? If we've got this problem, we're not getting enough practice in A3 thinking for mastery, well, what kind of goals should we try to achieve? And one thing is we want to move A3 practice from infrequent to frequent. That's relatively obvious. I think if we got to that all the way to that end level, which only a few of our participants in that poll said that they were at, we really want to make A3 thinking a cultural element. I like the idea of Mike Rother's idea of the Toyota kata, or that sort of muscle memory where that plan, do, check, act, or that A3 thinking is just essentially a reflexive mode in an organization. It's no longer a special tool. It's that everyday tool. And then last, I'd like to make one of our goals or targets, a reduction in perceived barriers to A3 use. And I would count among those barriers the idea that there is some sort of correctness or formality and the over-complexity maybe of some A3 processes out there. So that's the goals and targets section. And now what I want to do is move down to a little simple analysis here. And for that, I'm going to pull out our favorite, the fish, or one of my favorites, the fishbone diagram. Always real easy to use this to collect and organize, causes and effects, and potentially ferret out some sort of idea of what would potentially be a root cause or fixable. So we've got at the head of our fishbone diagram here this lack of practice for mastery, and going back through here, I would then use basically the 5 M's plus E approach. Essentially, you've got personnel or man, material, measurements, machines and methods, and environment, and use that to categorize maybe some of the hurdles that would be causing some sort of stoppage or problem with regards to achieving some level of practice and mastery. So first in the personnel section, I've tried to set this fishbone diagram up so that some of the more typical things we would see would be closer to that main backbone area. So when I talk about personnel, one of the first things that comes to mind is, well, are people trained in A3s and A3 thinkings? And I think we've got some people out there. One of my observations from the current state is sometimes, though, that training, although it's good, falls short of creating a sustaining use. So the training's there, but we're looking for the actual implementation and action. Another thing, though, that I think is sort of even more interesting, and I've alluded to this a little bit, is this sort of fear of failure. People that are trying to do A3s, they see these really nice, well-organized 11 by 17 pieces of paper, the examples, in John Shook's book, and say, boy, I can't do that. I don't know if I can, really sort of get to that level. And so there's a sort of a fear of failure, I think, on the parts of people. Certainly we need, mentor and role models, the ability to focus and, work just on sort of one A3 is certainly a problem that individuals face. And, maybe there's not enough, references for A3s that, people can leverage off of, so that's something that we need to address. And, as far as, references for A3s, this is where I would think about maybe material in a little bit different sense is what's the material for your A3s, right? What's the raw material coming into the process? Well, we've all sort of know that A3s are a problem-solving tool, and certainly issues or opportunities as the politically correct way to talk about problems are there. But then I, sort of move up and say, well, what about, decisions, justifications, explanations, presentations like this one, just being able to tell stories and, hold conversations. Is this a framework or are these materials that we can use to, get some more A3 practice? From a measurement standpoint, I look at, orientation. Is your organization results-oriented or process-oriented? Certainly A3s, work with both of those sort of situations, but we want to make sure that we understand that kind of thing going in as we, customize or sort of tweak our A3 approach for our particular organization. And then the other thing with regards to measurement, there's definitely sort of a limited accountability aspect. And, are people being held accountable for doing A3s? Are they being asked to do A3s? Is it part of their, performance evaluation, or whether they're perceived as being a good manager or supervisor based on whether they're using A3s or not? Machines, pretty simply, back up in here, this is where, sort of the classical, A3s, the senseis from Japan and Toyota say, A3s have to be, 8 or 11 by 17 A3 size paper, and you got to do them in pencil because erasing and changing is a big part of the process. And that's fine. I've sort of learned it that way myself. But, as I got to see and sort of think about this, I've sort of expanded my outlook a little bit about what, things constitute, good practice for creating A3s and what kind of tools and machines, would be applicable. Certainly software, is big. If you have ever, sat down to try to say, okay, I've got this great paper and pencil version of A3 now, I need to communicate it to a larger audience. Let's go ahead and put this into a Word, Excel, or PowerPoint. It's not the easiest thing in the world. I've spent, a good number of hours trying to get that stuff to fit on that piece of paper where everything seems to be fine in paper and pencil, but the translation into electronic and the lands of electronics and software tends to be a lot more difficult. Just in case you're wondering, this particular presentation is being done in a online software called Prezi, and I'm using this as an opportunity for me to improve my practice of A3s. I actually learned this from some of my MBA students who were presenting A3s in their class, and they brought this software to my attention. And it's a real good way to be able to move around the sort of a large landscape of a piece of paper or presentation and still keep your orientation. The methods that you see there, like I said, I think A3 thinking is relatively logic agnostic. Whether you're doing PDCA, DMAIC, this 7-step process that I'm showing you, theory, constraints, lean, or some other, as long as you've got, some sort of structure that you're comfortable with and you're following, I think, you can be very successful. And finally, with regards to the environment, where you're working or where you're going to be applying these A3 things, certainly, having, a visual workplace is a step up, a step in the right direction, but do you have the team support? Do you have the management? And I broke off on management as sort of two different, negative aspects potentially of management, and one would be too little management, where nobody's asking you for an A3 or reading your A3s or using A3s. And then also, maybe potentially too formal, where things are too structured, the hurdles too high, and it's really just, very hard to, use or be comfortable with your A3 approach. And of course, getting, A3 educated is another part of the environment that we need to be concerned about. So that's, sort of my overview of or analysis of the situation and how things fit together. And, based on this, what I would propose, as far as countermeasures go, here's my countermeasures section. And I think the big thing I'm leveraging off from a countermeasure standpoint is this, idea of the 10,000 hour rule. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with this. This was something made popular by Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers. But what he proposed in that book was that, perhaps maybe these sort of extraordinary individuals, what we would call outliers, maybe some of our the Six Sigma among us in our population, these people are not necessarily born that way or gifted, but it's just the fact that they've had some sort of extraordinary opportunity to practice. So people like the Beatles, just didn't drop out of the sky, but had, the experience of working, I think, in Hamburg, Germany for multiple years, playing, 8 hours a day, in the clubs there, where they developed and honed their skills. People like Bill Gates got extraordinary early access to computers and programming, even when they were in middle school and very much younger, and therefore, he had, the right amount of practice and opportunity when, his skills were called on, and that working with Microsoft to develop that operating system. So that's a 10,000 hour rule. So what we're trying to do for mastery is saying, well, how can I get my 10,000 hours, essentially? And that's that would be the solution. A big, hairy, audacious goal, I think. The other way I think, too, is that throwing up a little Dilbert cartoon here. And one of the things that I've always sort of believed at Dilbert is that, that, an idea has made it to the mainstream of business concepts when it shows up in Dilbert. And this is where I also, encourage you to be a little bit geeky with regards to your approach to A3s. Don't hesitate to use a little bit of humor. I think in a lot of ways we sometimes take ourselves a little bit too seriously as we go after some of these things. And so here's the breakdown on my countermeasures. So first off, look for excuses to use an A3. Stop, looking for reasons to use it. Sometimes you got to force it a little bit, but we're looking for ways to build up the number of hours of practice and experience. I'd also encourage you to consider what I call the 20% A3. And in this, I leverage off of the basic Pareto principle that you get 80% of the value is going to come out from 20% of the work. And in A3, that 20% is essentially the logic, thought process, capability building, and buy-in that you're getting. And then that other sort of 80% of the work is the fitting it into the format and making the fancy pictures and making it look nice. So just go for that 20% piece. And then finally, I'd encourage you to be what I call an A3 geek. I think we've got a little bit of head start on that in the Lean Six Sigma community. I think we're all, Lean Six Sigma geeks in one way or another. So we know what it's like to be a little bit of an outlier from the general population. So here's another way for you to practice your geekiness. So be proud. Let's get this stuff out of the closet. So we're gonna go ahead and move into some examples. But what I want to do first, before we do that, I want to take a little bit of a step back take a little bit of a breath and ask Larry if there are any questions that maybe people have at this point before we move on to the last part of our A3 here.
Thanks, Eric. This is a great time for people to start writing in what questions they have. I have one that I've been thinking about as we did our dry run a couple days ago, and as I've been listening to you talk here is, one of the things maybe I'd love to hear you address is perhaps this is going on in people's minds. They're thinking, well, if I'm using A3, am I setting myself up for people criticizing, how I've formatted and done this, something you just touched on a little bit, versus the content of it? How would you address that concern that people have that using a new tool like this is going to sort of open them up for extra criticism about how they're reporting versus, really the meat of the content that they want to express?
Yeah, I sort of like that good question, Larry, and that criticism idea. I think back to we had at our Lean Summit in January. We had a ex-CEO of Toyota Canada come down, and he related a story where he had spent a lot of time creating an A3 to propose a big capital expansion, and took it over to Japan to share with his boss over there. And I forget exactly what the figure was. Maybe it was a $50 million or $100 million expansion or whatever that they were trying to do, and there was very little comment on the content. But what the criticism came down was that this CEO from Canada had used color in his A3, and then A3s, in Toyota strictly need to be, pencil and black and white. So I think in a lot of ways, we have a tradition of sort of criticism and critique and a right and a wrong way to do things. But I think to some degree that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think a way to get around that too would be, when you're using these things, ask for permission from folks. Say, I am, new to this process. I've got a new tool. I'm not very good at it yet. Could you please allow me to try to use this to present my ideas? And, it's going to start a communication. It's going to start a conversation, not only about the content or the thing that you're trying to talk about, but also on how to use A3s and how to get the point across in the best way.
Yeah. I'm going to put one more question in, and then kind of, you've got some great examples coming up, and I know I don't want to take away from the time of those examples. So one more question here. This one's from Matthew, and this is a great question. He says, can you start using the A3 approach as an organizational approach as you go about analyzing a problem to building countermeasures, or are you only doing the A3 after all 7 areas are complete?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would sort of go back. I think the classic or prescribed method is that it is a problem-solving method that is certainly sequential, in how you apply it. I really encourage my students, though, that this A3 is actually a back and forth sort of process. So you might have some sort of idea of, what a good countermeasure or solution is, and you're going to go back and say, well, is this really warranted by the current conditions, and is this supported by, a good analysis? And I do my analysis and it doesn't support my countermeasure, and I go back and I tweak it. So I think there's a lot of back and forth. Certainly it's a great way to present a story. It's like the old total quality control storyboards type techniques, and present after the fact. But I think it's for my money, I would use it as sort of an upfront structure as a way to tackle and solve a problem and try to build it as you go.
Okay. Well, let's look at some of these examples.
Okay, good. So here's in my countermeasures, I'm sharing you some examples. You can kind of see them there. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on a few of these and just sort of make some points that hopefully will create a little freedom for you in how you approach your A3. So this is what I call the project kickoff A3, or maybe it's even more generically just a whiteboard A3. But many of the whiteboards we have in our organization have this great 11:17 aspect ratio, and it also has the characteristic of it gets it up vertical, in front of people's faces. This was actually a kickoff. Another professor and I, Jim Senna, were designing a project management course, and this course was going to be delivered to the Los Angeles Metropolitan Water District. And to start off the meeting here, we had both Jim, myself, and then a couple of high-level sort of administrators, vice provosts in the university who were there in the meeting. And I said, well, if you'll allow me, I would like to use this A3 structure here as a way to organize our meeting and, essentially create an agenda for walking through the issue and what we're trying to do. So we started with the background, current conditions, product, and we sort of walked through this. And you can kind of see, as the, colors of the markers change and the arrows go left and right, there was some, conversation about, how this should be put together. But the thing that I take away from this experience was, even though Jim and myself had done this A3 approach before, and we've written some papers and things on it, the fact that we brought 2 new novices in, and they were just, blown away and actually very appreciative that instead of having one of those, sort of circular, talking about the same old conversations over and over again, we had a very structured conversation and a good outcome. Now, I would normally say, maybe just a digital picture, get out your iPhone, take a picture of that thing, and that's good enough. You don't have to do any more work. In this particular case, because we wanted to share this with some other people, we actually went to the step of, translating that picture into an actual, electronic version of that A3. So next here is, this is an example of an A3. This is called the informative A3. I actually got this from some of my buddies at Zodiac Aerospace in Santa Maria, and they have, pretty, sort of quasi-formal growing A3 implementation plan there, and they essentially divide their A3s into 3 basic types: problem-solving A3s, proposal A3s, and informative A3s. And so this is really just an example of what they call an informative A3. It was taken some takeaways from the Lean Summit that we had in San Luis Obispo in January, and part of that, part of one of the very powerful things is, there's some information that they wanted to transfer back, some key learnings that they had, but this section down here in the where the follow-up section normally would be, improvements identified that we could use, is just a very powerful way to make sure that not only are people getting the learning, but they're also turning it into some practices back home that can help improve things. This next A3 is kind of interesting. I'm just going to talk through this a little bit, but this is essentially what I call the interview A3. And I first discovered or noted this. I had been teaching A3 thinking to my students for a while. As part of my class, they have to do A3s. And one of my students actually went down for an interview with the LA Fire Department. And I think we've all sort of been in that situation and going for a job where they have those, tricky behavioral interview questions, what would you do if? And so he had a question, something like the one that I'm presenting here is, what would you do as a team leader if you found one of your team members was not following standard procedure in a non-critical condition? And my student essentially sat back and said, well, first I would recognize that as an organization we have a responsibility to follow procedures that are both critical and non-critical as a sort of a high-level goal. And next I would check my understanding of the current circumstances under which the particular deviation occurred. And then I try to understand, well, what's the goal? What do we really want to have for a final, situation on this, or a final resolution? And, maybe that would be 100% compliance as an overall goal. Next I'd analyze and try to, identify the root cause of the noncompliance. Was it training? Was it difficulty in implementing the procedure? Was there a special cause? I'd identify some alternate options. Maybe I'd talk some of those options over with my boss and maybe the employee themselves. And then I'd put a plan in place, making sure I got buy-in from everybody. And then, if there were any issues or that I didn't address, I'd make sure that there was some sort of follow-up. And after my student got done doing that, the interviewer's, jaw just dropped and said, wow, what was that? And my student, launched into a conversation about, what they had learned about A3 thinking and A3 problem-solving approaches. And the interviewer actually sort of jumped up, called some of the other interviewers, that were interviewing other students into the room to sort of hear what my student had to say. So that was a kind of a shining moment and really sort of a revelation for me that, this sort of A3 thinking can be a very powerful tool, even if it wasn't on a 11 by 17 piece of paper. The next example I want to share is what I call the email A3. And I guess I would argue that this is from an email I sent out, that maybe one of the reasons why we're doing 11 by or A3s on 11 by 17 pieces of paper and using pencil is because those materials were just actually relatively available and ubiquitous, within Toyota at the time that these sort of ideas and this approach was being developed. You've got a bunch of engineers who have access to 11 by 17 drawing paper for doing, mechanical engineering diagrams and whatnot. And certainly engineers are, well versed in the use of pencils and erasers. So they were using the techniques and the tools that they had at the time. And maybe if we were doing A3s nowadays, we would come in and we would maybe look at, A3s from a different perspective, and maybe email is sort of the ubiquitous tool that we all use every day. So could we create an A3 where we're going to send out sort of a first person initiates a first draft. Here's what I think the background is. Here's what I think the current conditions are. Can the people on my team sort of tweak this back and forth? It also has a lot of horsepower and legs, I think, from the standpoint of the virtual team and running a global enterprise. So that's the email A3. The next example I want to share, and I think in the medical community, those other doctors out there with an MD, they're usually admonished not to necessarily operate on their family members. I've sort of never taken that tact. I have no fear of operating on my own family, I guess. And this is really an example of a problem that we were dealing with in my family. My wife was considering retirement from a job she had worked at, for 9 years, and she was sort of dreading the conversation with her boss. So we went to Panera Bread, bought a cup of coffee, grabbed out a pad of paper, and I essentially walked her through the A3 process. What's the background? What's the current situation? Can we state the problem real clearly? What's our goals? And it was a very useful exercise for her. I don't know if any of you have had spouses and tried to have these sorts of conversation with them. If you've got that sort of logical, sort of lean Six Sigma mindset, and it's not always easy, but in this case, it worked. I was thinking that she was going to then translate that those pieces of paper into some sort of email to her boss or use that as a conversation with her boss, but she actually went the next step and turned that into a Word document with a sort of a more classical A3 format. And she called up her boss and then sent this off to him, and they reviewed it. And another, once again, here was somebody, her boss, who had never seen an A3. Also, their human resource manager, HR manager, never seen one, but was just, floored by how eloquent and well structured this was, and how powerful and compelling. I also got to share with you a little sort of, I guess, a watch out for. I'm now getting, a lot of requests from Dawn's coworkers and, some of the managers that she works with, that when it comes time for them to retire, they want me to do their A3 too. So something you got to watch out for. And something we've all sort of run into is, well, how do I put together my PowerPoint? And boy, it's really easy to get up to 30, 40 slides. But if you think about, that A3 7-step structure, 7 parts, could you have like just one slide for each one of those parts in an A3? So that's 7 slides plus maybe an overview slide, maybe a title slide. You're looking at 9 slides to cover, something that might be a little bit of a difficult subject to sort of cover in that sort of brevity. So I like that as an approach, and certainly do enough PowerPoint slides or PowerPoint presentations to really get a lot of practice making that happen. This particular one was once again from some building lean community work I was doing or am continuing to do. Talk about other ubiquitous tools in the workplace. Here's a flip chart, simple sort of flip chart A3. No reason that we couldn't do this vertical sort of approach to an A3 as opposed to the horizontal as far as flip charts. This was from working with one of my teaching assistant teams. We were having a problem with trying to make sure we're getting all our to-do items done as a team, and we wanted to create this, what we call a running to-do capability. So this is just a little way to sort of get the main pieces. Another part of this is just about that whole sort of going vertical. I think we spend a lot of time too often in sort of that horizontal meeting structure where everybody's got their own little pad or their own little laptop in front of them and that everybody else can't see. But if you get it up there on the wall and you have this compelling logic, you have a lot better opportunity to be successful. This test report A3 is something that, once again, dealing with my family, my daughter is a senior test engineer for Pratt Whitney in East Hartford, Connecticut, and she tests jet turbine blades. And she was relating to me a problem she was having in communicating with her test customers on how to set up and approve test parameters, how to communicate results in an easy way, how to make sure that there's follow-up and that whole sort of testing and communication process is improved and made tighter on a regular basis. And so she and I are working on this. This is a mock-up of what her A3 would look like, and the kind of things that she would propose would be in there. And she's gotten good buy-in and good reaction from her management at Pratt Whitney to go ahead and roll something like this out. So she does about 2 or 3 of these things a month, so that gets her frequency up as far as applying A3 thinking. And the last example I'm going to share, because I'm a professor, so one of the things I do frequently is I teach courses here at Cal Poly. I do about 6 to 8 different courses a year. And so this is what I call essentially the syllabus A3. And so I've got the different logic sort of embedded here. The plan piece, the grasp the situation is trying to get the students to understand, why this is important, why we're using this approach. We're going to implement, as part of the implementation, we've got responsibilities for professors versus students. And then, the measure and analyze, these are the grades and the components of the grades that the students are going to achieve. So in this class, I teach A3. The syllabus is set up with it like an A3. I think there's, essentially limitless ways that you could apply A3s. So those are some examples that that I would like to sort of share with you. Like I said, I think there's many more. You should have seen some of the ones that didn't make the cuts. For example, I've got the departmental meeting A3. There's the Roberts Rules of Order A3. This was something that I did. I sit in the academic senate at Cal Poly, where we use Roberts Rules of Order, which is essentially its own inherent logic, but it kind of falls short when you've got those whereases and resolves. It falls short as far as, well, and then what are you going to measure to make sure that happens, and what's the plan for implementation, where the A3 really adds those extra pieces and makes that more powerful. So here's the plan. I challenge you to develop your own plan. Here are some ideas maybe on how to get started. First, I'd say think small. One concept I've recently been introduced to, this is from another lean guru, Bo Keats, in his Patient Journeys, talks about this idea of small reversible experiments. You know, A3s are made to be revised and changed and improved. So I'd encourage you to do that. You know, it's sort of the ultimate in reversible. Get a format you know well and feel comfortable with, right? Like I said, the logic, we're relatively logic agnostic. If you like the DMAIC process, set up your A3s on a DMAIC basis. Just do it. You know, be the change. You know, somebody's got to be the first one out of the door. Be that A3 geek. And hold yourself accountable. Commit to try and apply. Doing this presentation in A3 format is part of my commitment. I'm trying to use A3 as often as I can, and this is one way to do that. Get the first one done. In writing and in research, it tends to be a credo. Just get that crappy little first draft out there. You know, it's easier to understand and fix once you've got that first one done. And this is a learning process. Pick yourself up, do it again, right? Make sure you get that learning and don't be afraid to fail. I would also encourage you to go public. Ask, you know, your coworkers for, you know, their A3s, their thoughts. Have that A3 conversation. If you need to ask permission, tell them you're just learning, you're just trying, you'd like to try something new, but I think you'll be surprised by the success of the results. And I think people are generally happy to do this, especially when they see the results, the organization, the logic, the support, you know, the plan, the execution. So finally, I just want to share a few key learnings based on my experience with the A3 and the A3 thought process. You know, first is it's an analytical and creative process, and don't shortchange that creative part. I think the more you can be creative, find different ways to use this, I think the better off you're going to be. There's really no right or wrong way to use A3 thinking. It's just the experience and things to learn from. So this A3 thinking is a process. And finally, you don't have to be an expert to get the 80% value. Think about that 20%. You know, if you can't get the 20%, start out with the 10%. But I think there's good stuff to be got. If you apply the logic and the thought process, the value will come. Okay, Larry, that's it for me. I don't know if we've got any time, but we're pretty close to the hour mark.
We're close to the hour. How about a couple very short questions?
Okay, sounds good.
All right, here we go. So two people had asked a similar question. Apparently their organizations use the 8D, and they wanted to know if you're familiar with that, as well as maybe do a compare and contrast of the two.
Actually, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
Now you said it was an HC?
No, an 8 as in the number 8, and then D as in dog. 8D.
8D.
Yeah.
No, but I have a feeling that it's as opposed to a 7-step process, it's some sort of 8-step process. But the difference is 1.
Okay.
That's a joke.
Let's see. Can you share any good methods of gaining sponsorship or leadership support in using the A3s as a tool? That's from Dan.
I think you just have to do it. Like I said, my experience, even with high-level administrators that don't understand, or have never heard of an A3, the logic itself is just very compelling. Go ahead and do it. Ask permission. Say, if you're sitting around that table and nobody has offered to really sort of run the meeting, offer to say, hey, if I just put these categories on the flip chart here, background, current condition, problem, goals and targets, can we sort of walk through these things to make sure we all have a good understanding? And that would be my recommendation for a good place to start.
All right. There's a couple more questions. If it's all right with you, maybe you could address these to individuals after the webinar.
Yeah, that's fine. I like I said, I love this stuff. I need to practice. So if somebody wants to practice with me, I'd happy to respond.
Excellent. Excellent. So I'm just going to finish up here. Thank you so much. This was great. As you know, in the practice that we did, I was very inspired by your examples. I hope everyone here was as well.
All right, good.
All right. I wanted to mention that we do teach A3 in MoreSteam courses. We also teach a Master Black Belt Development and Certification program with the Fisher College of Business where we teach advanced lean topics. The program includes 4 weeks of training, 2 online through the MoreSteam portal, 2 live at the OSU campus in Columbus, Ohio. And you can get more information on that on the MoreSteam.com website. People have asked, we always tell them, we'll be uploading the recorded presentations, slides, and any other materials to our website, and you'll receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the resources. We'll be announcing the next few webcasts in our series in the very near future. If you'd like to receive monthly webcast alerts, you can see the address here, moresteam.com/presentations. There's an alert sign-up. You can sign right up, and you'll receive just 1 monthly email to tell you about all the great webcasts like this one. Eric, thank you again for the examples and all your time. This was great. This concludes our webcast, and thanks to everyone for attending.